And the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Have you ever read this in the biblical record? It appears to be one of the most scientifically challenging passages in the whole of the Bible. How could a bush burn and not be consumed? How? Just how? Probably you might be thinking about this or have ever thought about it. But what I've been reading, especially with regards to this particular passage, proves to be one of the most fascinating discoveries I've ever done. Let me give you a few of them. According to the McGill Office for Science and Society, the Dictamnus Albus plant, otherwise known as the burning bush plant, is found throughout northern Africa and parts of southern Europe and Asia. According to the office, this particular plant is a candidate for the burning bush because of a number of volatile oils that the bush contains. But the question is, could it be that this is responsible for the burning in the bush that Moses stumbled upon? Well, suggestions have been made that the Dictamnus albus plant, found throughout northern Africa, is really a candidate for the burning bush. In the summer, the plant, also known as the gas plant, exudes a variety of volatile oils that can catch fire readily and may give the impression that the bush is burning. So, was Moses merely witnessing the combustion of a mixture of terpenes and chemicals? That's an interesting hypothesis. But the flaw is this, and I believe probably you would have discovered now. Even if the Dictamnus albus plant was the one which Moses witnessed, of course, if it was producing oils by whose virtue it was burning, at the end of the day, it should have been consumed because it was burning. Secondly, even producing oils to catalyze its burning, there should have been an ignition, something to put it on fire. And that brings the importance of how miracles can only be the source of inspiration and explanation for certain events. Well, you may not believe in miracles, but science has failed to explain it all. In the ancient Near East, fire was both feared and revered. It was a symbol of divine presence, judgment, purification, and covenant. But perhaps nowhere in recorded history do we find a bush engulfed in flame yet untouched by its heat, except in one place, and that is the slopes of Horeb, or what we may popularly call as Sinai. This phenomenon is not a myth. Across ages and traditions, scholars, mystics, and scientists have examined this account in Exodus 3 verse 1 to 6, wondering how a ton of bush could burn continuously without being consumed. As already introduced, some suggest a supernatural fire, a visible manifestation of divine energy, or what we know as the Shekinah glory. And this is a concept known among the Hebrews as the intense holy presence of God. But I've been thinking, why a bush? And why Moses? Well, to understand this call, we must first explore how Hebrews understood identity, calling, and covenant. Among the ancient Israelites, names weren't simply labels. They were declarations of destiny. For example, the name of the writer himself, Moses, in Hebrew, as we have discovered in the previous episode, Moshe, likely derived from the Egyptian mesu, which means born of, but possibly adopted from royal culture. Notwithstanding, in Hebrew it is tied to the verb mashal, which means to draw out, echoing Pharaoh's daughter's saying, I drew him out of the water, as found in Exodus 2 verse 10. In essence, Moses' name foretold his mission to draw God's people out of bondage. You may have heard names like Elijah, which means my God is Yahweh, Samuel, which means God has heard, Isaac, which means he laughs. These names reveal how names are embedded in memory, covenant, and prophetic function. So when Moses asked for God's name in Exodus 3 verse 13, he wasn't just curious. In fact, he was asking what nature, authority, and promise backs your command. And what was God's reply? I am that I am. In Hebrew, Eye Asher Eye. And this would change history forever, because it was not merely a name, it was an eternal revelation. I welcome you back. Let's enjoy. The burning bush. After 40 years in Midian, Moses had adjusted to a simple life. He was shepherding, writing, and raising a family. Tradition holds that during this time he wrote the books of Job and Genesis, laying the theological groundwork for God's salvation narrative. But then came Horeb. At Mount Horeb, or Sinai, the angel of the Lord appeared in a burning bush. And this was not just any angel. As the narrative reveals, it was God himself, the pre-incarnate Christ, as we can refer or cross-reference in other parts of the Bible, like Genesis 22 verse 11, Judges 6 verse 11, and Judges 13 verse 17. God introduced himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, linking Moses' present to the covenantal past and divine promises yet to be fulfilled. God's orders. As we see, God reveals himself through verbs: see, descend, and take out. Very importantly, see. God sees the suffering of his people, and this theme is clearly depicted in the Bible. We can refer from 2 Kings 9 verse 26. Again, God descends. He comes down to act, and that was part of the order he gave Moses. Finally, he takes out. He acts at the right time to fulfill his covenant. So it is no surprise that he said to Moses in the personal commission, go, bring my people out. Moses, who was once bold and self-assured, now hesitated. It wasn't just a mere sight. His pride had been stripped. Humbled and hesitant, he asked, who am I? And God replied, I will be with you. Now let's come back to the very important theme of names, the name of God. As already established, in the context of the Hebrew reckoning, names were very significant. In fact, every name in the Bible has a covenantal or a prophetic attachment. Basically, it has a meaning. In other words, no one was named in the Hebrew context, especially in the times of the Bible, that had no story attached to the name. So basically, when Moses asked for God's name, he declared, I am who I am. As already stated in Hebrew, Eye Asher Eye, eternal, unchanging, and self-existent. Over time, out of reverence, Jews ceased pronouncing the sacred name, replacing it with names like Adonai, which is Lord, or Hashem, that is the name. The original pronunciation of I, Her, Where, He, or what we have come to know as the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, was lost, but God's character remains accessible. He is a healer, provider, shepherd, father, and love. It does not end there. We see in the biblical narrative that as Moses was having this discourse with God, he made excuses, and these are brought to view in fourfold. Moses clearly was trying to excuse himself of the mission in 4 different ways. And what are these? He said, "Who am I?" But God always, as we have seen, saw the humility of Moses. He descended to him and acted. He replied, "I will be with you." And we see clearly that the application of this very important answer is that our strength lies in God's presence. Again, Moses asks, "What is your name?" And God's promise or response is, "I am," which implies he is eternal and faithful. Then he goes on, Moses, saying, "They won't believe me." Then God responds in the promise, "I'll give signs," according to verse 8 of Exodus chapter 3. Application is, God confirms his call through power. Well, Moses is not satisfied. He continues to ask, "I am not eloquent." And God says, "I will teach you." And this by implication means God equips the one he calls. Eventually, God says, "Enough. Take Aaron. You will go." Wow. The return of Egypt. Well, Moses obeyed. He sought Jethro's blessing, gathered his family, and journeyed toward Egypt. But one of the most important twists in this story, and a bit challenged passage in the Bible, is that God sought to kill him suddenly. The question is, why? Well, Moses had neglected a vital covenant. It is noteworthy to know that the mere calling of Moses was by virtue of the promise God had made to his forefathers. In fact, he was only on a mission to realize this promise, and that was a covenant. The sign of this covenant Moses had neglected. By refusing to circumcise his son, he had not fully realized the importance of the mission he carried. Moses had neglected a vital covenant, circumcision. And Zipporah, being a discerning woman, understood the urgency and performed it. The delay would have cost Moses his mission and probably his life. It might sound a bit worrying to know that God sought to kill him, but in the context of mission, covenants are not to be broken, especially when there are promises attached. And here, God again clearly depicted the importance of fulfilling a promise he had made. How do you treat promises? Indeed, it is very important that we clearly understand that modern medical science confirms the importance of circumcision and its health benefits. Studies have showed the reduced risk of urinary tract infections in infants and lower incidences of certain sexually transmitted infections. Again, the circumcised have a decreased risk of penile and cervical cancers. Well, for the Israelites, these benefits were secondary. The act itself was a statement that we belong to God. And now Moses, the man who had once tried to save Israel in his own strength and failed, stood before the bush, broken, humbled, but called. Are you ready to be called?